Mairo Dai versus the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. Man, this is easily one of the most insane fights in all of Naruto, and the worst part is that almost nobody talks about it the way they should. Picture the scene. Third Great Ninja War. A battlefield swallowed in mist. Team Guy still just kids. Might Guy, Genma, Ebisu, basically children thrown straight into hell. And on the other side, the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist. Not just any squad. They were the top of the food chain in the hidden mist village, each one wielding a legendary blade, each one elite level. And you're thinking, it's over. There's no plot armor that saves 3 Genin from that. Except, there was someone there. Mairo Dai. And this is where it gets insane. Mairo Dai wasn't a genius, wasn't a prodigy, wasn't respected. He was treated like a joke, the eternal Genin, the failure. But what nobody knew was that he had mastered the 8 inner gates. You look at the scene and think, okay, he'll open up to the 6th gate, put up a fight, and die. But no, he opens the 8th gate, the gate of death. And that means one thing, he already knew he was going to die there. It wasn't a desperate last attempt, it was a decision. Now think about it. If opening the 8th gate puts the user temporarily above even KJ level, and we saw Guy nearly kill Jinchuriki Madara with it, now imagine a closed battlefield against 7 swordsmen. It wasn't a fight, it was a massacre. But not a one-sided one. It was an exchange. Out of the 7 swordsmen, only 3 survived, and they survived because they fled. That means 4 died there. 4 legendary swordsmen killed by a man the village called a failure. And you start imagining what it must have looked like. Mairo Dai charging forward at absurd speed, the ground shattering with every step, the air trembling, legendary blades trying to keep up. And they couldn't, because the 8th gate isn't just a technique. It's a total explosion of life, every movement tearing his muscles apart, every punch breaking his own bones, too. And that's what makes this fight monumental. It's not just about power, it's about meaning. Mairo Dai didn't win, but he saved the future. Because if Guy had died there, there would have been no 8th gate against Madara years later. One of the best fights in the entire series, by the way. And there's another detail almost nobody mentions. The 3 swordsmen who survived never carried the same narrative weight again, as if that battle shattered their aura. This fight is the perfect symbol of what the series loves to do. The underdog carrying the most absurd technique of all. And you know what's even crazier? He didn't have talent, just discipline. And on that day, discipline killed legends. Tobirama Senju versus Kinkaku and Ginkaku. This fight is practically a myth inside the Naruto universe. And at the same time, it's treated like a footnote. Oh, he died on a mission. No, he didn't just die on a mission. He died in a brutal ambush against 2 of the most dangerous men of that era. Let's build the scenario. Tobirama Senju, 2nd Hokage, creator of the Flying Thunder God technique, creator of Edo Tensei, creator of the Shadow Clone technique, one of the most intelligent and lethal shinobi in history, the man who practically engineered half of the Hidden Leaf's strategic foundation. Now put him in the middle of a war, already exhausted, already having fought, leading an elite squad, and then the Kinkaku unit appears. And it's not just the 2 brothers, it's them leading an entire force of extremely powerful ninja. But let's focus on the brothers. They're practically anomalies, descendants of the Sage of 6 Paths. They survived being swallowed by the Nine Tails. They carry Nine Tails chakra within their own bodies. They wield the Sage's treasured tools, mythical weapons capable of sealing souls, manipulating words, and bending the rules of combat itself. So you look at it and ask, in a clean 1 versus 1, who wins? Tobirama or one of the brothers? Honestly, I think Tobirama wins a pure 1 versus 1. He's a strategist. He reads movement patterns. He's fought Uchiha at Madara's level. He understands large-scale warfare. But this wasn't a 1 versus 1. This was an ambush. And that's where it gets heavy. Tobirama was already worn down. He realizes there's no clean way out. So what does he do? He chooses to die, but not recklessly. He chooses to stay behind so his team can survive. That changes everything. Now picture it. Kinkaku activating partial Ninetales mode. That violent red aura flaring around him. Ginkaku wielding the Sage's tools. The battlefield dissolving into chaos. And Tobirama chaining Flying Thunder God activations. Vanishing and reappearing. Marking targets. Likely eliminating members of the unit 1 by 1. But here's the brutal truth. Even with Flying Thunder God, even with overwhelming intelligence, he's facing 2 pseudo-Jinchuriki with legendary weapons. It's not just physical power, It's numbers, plus raw force, plus accumulated exhaustion. I imagine Tobirama fighting with surgical precision, trying to isolate one brother first, maybe separating Ginkaku from the support of the treasured tools, maybe attempting a decisive finish before the Ninetales chakra fully stabilizes. But fatigue starts collecting its debt, and unlike his brother Hashirama, Tobirama didn't have absurd regeneration. He wasn't a tank, he was precision. In the end, he dies. But it's not a simple defeat, because the impact of that battle echoes for years. The architect of the modern shinobi system falls fighting two men driven by instinct and brute force. It's almost symbolic. So when someone asks, did Tobirama lose because he was weaker? No. He lost because he was at war, because he was outnumbered, because he chose to value the village's future over his own life. And that's what it means to be Hokage. Hanzo versus Jiraiya, Tsunade and Orochimaru. My friends, this right here is an almost biblical battle within the Naruto universe. Imagine the setting. Second Great Ninja War. A megakuri. Constant rain. War everywhere. Territories being used as battlefields by the larger villages. And in the middle of it all, Hanzo of the Salamander. This guy wasn't just strong, he was feared. Literally the leader of the Hidden Rain Village, a poison specialist, an absurd strategist, with a reputation for defeating entire squads alone. Now put on the other side three young talents from the Leaf, Jiraiya, Tsunade, and Orochimaru. Important, they still weren't the Sannin. They were building their names, and here comes the part we have to imagine, because the entire fight is never shown, only the result, and the result is already insane. They lose, but they survive, and Hanzo decides to spare the three of them. That alone is absurd. You imagine how it started. Jiraiya trying a direct offensive, using fire techniques, maybe smaller summons, Tsunade probably on the front line, smashing the ground, protecting the others, trying to keep the tempo. Orochimaru analyzing attack patterns, trying to understand how Hanzo's poison worked, and then you place Hanzo in the middle of it. Poison respirator, weapons coated in toxins, summoning a giant salamander spreading toxic gas. The fight probably turned into chaos quickly. Rain mixing with poison in the air. Slippery battlefield, low visibility. And here's something important. Hanzo wasn't just fighting three ninja, he was fighting three completely different styles. Jiraiya is adaptable. Tsunade is brute force with regeneration. Orochimaru is the cold mind. But even so, it wasn't enough, because Hanzo was a war veteran. He had already seen everything. He wasn't impulsive. I imagine he started by neutralizing Tsunade first, trying to push her endurance to the limit, then pressuring Jiraiya to remove his mobility. And Orochimaru was probably the last to be cornered. And then comes the detail that changes everything. Hanzo could have killed all three, but he didn't. He recognized the potential, and he named them the Sannin of the Leaf. That is massive, because that title is born in defeat. They don't gain reputation by winning. They gain it by surviving. And that shapes who each of them becomes afterward. This fight is the turning point. It's there that they stop being prospects and become legends. And there's another interesting layer. Years later, Hanzo is defeated by pain. In other words, the man who was once practically a god of war ends up being surpassed by someone shaped by those same wars. It's as if that fight marks the beginning of an era, and its inevitable end as well. If we speculate, who would win today? The Sannin at their peak would probably defeat Hanzo together, but at that moment in the story, they were still being forged. By the way, opening a parenthesis here, do you think Hanzo is underrated? Because he has that whole aura behind the tough guy image. But I don't know. I kind of think he's a bit weak. Drop your opinion below. Kisame versus Roshi. Man, this one is brutal because it barely appears, but when you stop to think about what happened, it's absurd. Roshi wasn't just any ninja. He was the Jinchuriki of the Yanbi, the Four Tails. In other words, he carried inside him a massive bijou with practically infinite chakra and the capacity to devastate entire villages. And unlike many Jinchuriki, Roshi trained in isolation. He mastered lava techniques. He had real control over the Four Tails' power. He wasn't inexperienced. Now put on the other side, Kisame Hoshigaki, the man called the Tailed Beast without a tail. And that's not an exaggeration. Absurd chakra, Samehada draining energy, ridiculous endurance, the ability to fight for hours. Picture the scene. Rocky terrain, probably an isolated environment since Jinchuriki rarely stayed in the center of their villages. Roshi may be trying to keep his distance, using lava to create a hostile battlefield. Kisame smiling, because lava isn't a problem for him if he can drain chakra. And that's where the fight gets interesting. In a direct clash, Roshi has explosive advantage, partial Biju transformation, chakra arms, massive pressure. But Kisame doesn't fight to explode quickly. He fights to wear you down. Samehada starts absorbing the Four Tails chakra, and that changes everything, because a Jinchuriki depends on massive reserves. If you start draining that reserve, you break the engine of the fight. I imagine Roshi trying to force a full transformation. But Kisame probably activates that technique where he creates a water dome, that liquid prison where he fuses with Samehada. Now think about that. A lava Jinchuriki, trapped inside an artificially created ocean, reduced mobility, impaired vision, chakra being drained every second. It's cruel. This fight wasn't decided by brute strength. It was decided by compatibility of abilities. And here comes the heaviest detail. Roshi fought practically alone. Jinchuriki were isolated, feared, kept at a distance. The Akatsuki exploited that. They chose isolated targets. And this fight proves how strategic the organization was. It wasn't just two strong villains. It was systematic hunting. And Kisame was the perfect predator for that kind of target. And that's considering Itachi was outside the fight at Kisame's request. Imagine if he had stepped in too. There really would have been no way for Roshi to win. Gengetsu versus Mew. Bro, this one is legendary level ninja combat. On one side, Gengetsu Hozuki, the second Mizukage, a master of mist-based genjutsu, owner of that giant clam that creates absurd illusions, on top of the exploding steam technique that's basically a liquid demon. On the other side, Mu, the second Tsuchikage, the guy who can literally turn invisible, erase his own presence, split his body in half, and still use Jinten, dust release, which disintegrates anything at the molecular level. This isn't a normal fight. Picture the battlefield, open terrain, probably filled with the remnants of previous clashes. Gengetsu starts by summoning that giant clam, and that's it. Illusion activated. Now Mu doesn't know what's real anymore, but Mu doesn't rely only on sight. He erases his presence, erases his chakra signature, disappears completely, so you get an absurd situation. A man who creates large-scale illusions versus a man who literally cannot be detected. Imagine the beginning of the fight as a chess match. Gengetsu provoking, laughing, mocking. Mu silent, waiting for the right moment to fire off Jinten. But here's the detail. Gengetsu isn't just genjutsu. He has that exploding steam technique that creates a miniature version of himself, a watery clone that grows and detonates repeatedly. That's not just offense, it's constant pressure. And Mu, no matter how invisible he is, still has to attack to win. And when he attacks, he reveals his position. I imagine Mu must have hit Gengetsu with Jinten at least once, because the fight ended with both of them dead. But for that to happen, Gengetsu must have pushed Mu to the limit too. Maybe he destroyed part of Mu's body before he could divide. Maybe he forced Mu to burn too much chakra maintaining invisibility and using Jintan. What's most interesting is that both of them had extremely technical styles. This wasn't brute force. And in the end, a lethal draw. They killed each other. And that's narratively massive, because it shows something rare in Naruto. Sometimes there is no winner. Sometimes two equal forces simply cancel each other out. Sasori versus the third Kazekage. This one is insane. The third Kazekage was considered the strongest in the history of the Hidden Sand Village up to that point. It wasn't a symbolic title. It was real recognition. He mastered Satetsu, Iron Sand, an absurd variation of magnet release that allowed him to create blades, projectiles, shields, metallic rain, practically anything. It was defense and offense at the same time. Now think about this. The strongest man in the village simply disappears. And years later, we find out he was killed by a ninja from his own village, Sasori. But that's not all. Sasori didn't just kill him and walk away. He killed him and turned the Kazekage into a human puppet. That's brutal on every level. Picture the scene. The third Kazekage, experienced, battle-hardened, a strategist. Sasori still young, but already a genius, already cold, already obsessed with eternity. I imagine this fight starting as a direct confrontation. The Kazekage using Satetsu to dominate the battlefield, iron sand flying in massive waves, forming defensive patterns, trying to crush Sasori before he could get close. But here's where Sasori's genius comes in. He doesn't fight like a traditional ninja. He fights like a manipulator. He probably used puppets to test patterns. Maybe he used poison to wear him down. Maybe he prepared traps beforehand. And this is the crucial point. Satetsu is powerful, but it depends on control. If Sasori managed to create an opening, a single opening, maybe through distraction, maybe through poisoning, It was over. Because Sasori doesn't need to win strength against strength. He just needs to land one hit. And his poison is fatal. Now imagine the moment the Kazekage realizes he's been struck. The strongest man in the village, defeated by a ninja from his own village. That's not just combat. That's symbolism. And then comes the most disturbing part. Sasori turns the Kazekage's body into a weapon and uses Satetsu through him. That's almost profane within the ninja world. He didn't just defeat the strongest in the village, he appropriated his legacy. Kakuzu versus Hashirama. I don't even know if we can call this a fight. It's more like a Hashirama monologue. First Hokage. Hashirama Senju. The man who defeated Madara. The man who handled Biju like they were pets. Absurd regeneration. Wood release on a continental scale. Now put on the other side. Kakuzu. Yes, the same one who later fights Shikamaru's team. But here's the point. At the time of this confrontation, Kakuzu wasn't just a mercenary. He was the top assassin of the Hidden Waterfall Village, and he received a direct mission. Kill Hashirama Senju. That's it. And here's where the speculation gets delicious. Because officially, Kakuzu lost, but survived. And that alone is strange, because Hashirama wasn't known for letting people escape. So imagine the setting. Open field, maybe a forest. Hashirama probably wasn't in full-scale war mode, but he was still the strongest shinobi alive. Kakuzu approaches with strategy. He's not the type to charge in screaming. He analyzes, he tests. The problem is, Hashirama isn't easy to read. Wood release isn't just wood, it's life. It's battlefield control. It's chakra suppression. I imagine Kakuzu starting with long-range attacks, maybe wind and fire combined, maybe trying to strike from blind spots. But the issue is that Hashirama simply creates a forest out of nowhere. And when you're fighting someone who can alter the entire environment, your plan starts collapsing. Now here's the interesting part. Kakuzu is a survivor. If he realizes he can't win, he retreats. I don't think this fight was Hashirama crushing him in 2 minutes. I think it was a fast, intense clash that was extremely uneven in raw power. But Kakuzu realized that early. Maybe he lost hearts there. Maybe he had to use extreme techniques just to escape. And the most important detail? He made it back to his village alive and was punished, which means the mission failed. But he didn't die. And that shows 2 things. First, Hashirama was truly monstrous. Second, Kakuzu was always smarter than he looked. Shisui versus Danzo. This is a fight that makes you angry because of the level of betrayal involved. It's the exact moment when the story starts sliding downhill toward the Uchiha massacre. Shisui Uchiha wasn't just any member of the clan. He was considered one of the most talented of his generation. Absurd speed, refined genjutsu, and most importantly, Kotoa Matsukami, possibly the most dangerous genjutsu in the entire series. It's not a normal illusion. It's not trapping someone in a mental dimension. It's implanting an idea into someone's mind, without them realizing they were manipulated. Now imagine that in a political context. The Uchiha clan was planning a coup d'etat. The village was suspicious. Tension was at its limit. Shisui believes he can use Kotoa Matsukami on the clan leader to prevent the conflict. In other words, he wants to resolve a war through silent manipulation. And then Danzo enters, the most paranoid man in the Leaf, the one who believed any potential threat had to be eliminated before it could grow. Danzo learns about Kotoa Matsukami and decides that power is too dangerous to remain outside his control. Now picture the scene, most likely an ambush. Because Danzo isn't the type to call for an honorable duel. He waits for a vulnerable moment. Ambushed, even wounded, he still had enough awareness and control to make one final strategic decision. And then, he throws himself into the river. And here's the part that hurts. This fight isn't about who's stronger. It's about consequences. If Shisui wins, maybe the coup never happens. Maybe the massacre is avoided. Maybe Itachi never has to do what he did. But Danzo wins. And with that, he ensures 2 things. The massacre, but he lost the physical fight. But his final act, entrusting the eye to Itachi, is what prevents Danzo from having absolute control. Minato versus A and Killer Bee. Imagine the setting. Third Great Ninja War, open battlefield, tension in the air, everyone already at their physical and mental limits. And in the middle of it all appears the most insane duo from the Hidden Cloud Village. A, the future 4th Raikage, pure strength, pure explosiveness, pure physical speed. And beside him, Killer B, Jinchuriki of the 8 Tails, with absurd reflexes and near-perfect synchronization with his Biju. Now put on the other side Minato Namikaze, the Yellow Flash. And this is where things already get interesting, because this fight isn't about who hits harder. It's about who understands time better. A is known for monstrous speed, practically a human missile. When he activates his lightning release armor, his body becomes a walking weapon. And B isn't just support. He's reading ability, instinct, perception. The kind of ninja who sees the movement before it happens. So imagine the first charge. A rushes straight at Minato, confident, accelerating to the point of distorting the air. And then, Minato simply isn't there anymore. Flying Thunder God. No visible movement. No apparent preparation. He just vanishes and reappears behind him. And this is where the fight becomes absurd, because A's speed is physical. It's a body moving through space. Minato's is instantaneous. It's not a race, it's teleportation. But it's not that simple, because B enters the play. The moment Minato reappears behind A, ready to mark him with a kunai, Killer B is already spinning his blade to intercept. That's insane awareness. It shows B recognized the Flying Thunder God pattern almost immediately. And that moment is incredible because it proves Minato wasn't fighting two ordinary ninja. He was fighting a synchronized duo, A applying frontal pressure, B closing angles, Minato throwing kunai across the battlefield, marking terrain, creating strategic teleport points. It wasn't just who's faster, it was who controls space, and Minato controls space. But here's a detail many people ignore. Minato wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to break their rhythm and create psychological advantage. And he succeeded. Because after that encounter, A never underestimated the Leaf again. He began to respect the name Minato as a real threat. If it had been a fight to the death, man, it's tough. A has absurd durability. B has a bijou. But Minato has intelligence and precise finishing ability. I honestly think that in a prolonged 2 versus 1 scenario, Minato would eventually gain strategic advantage, especially if he managed to isolate one of them momentarily. But at the same time, one mistake against two ninja at that level is fatal. And that's what makes this fight so great. It wasn't a massacre. It wasn't humiliation. It was recognition. It was the moment three monsters looked at each other and understood each other's level. And that's what shaped Minato's reputation as the fastest ninja in history. Not because someone said it, but because two of the fastest ninja alive couldn't lay a hand on him. Obito versus Yagura. Now we're getting into one of those stories that isn't just a fight. It's manipulation on an absurd level. Because when we talk about Obito versus Yagura, we're not just talking about a physical confrontation. We're talking about the silent scoot of an entire village. Picture this. The Hidden Mist village already had a brutal reputation. Bloody graduation exams, a suffocating atmosphere, constant distrust in the air. But at some point, that stopped being just harsh military culture and became total oppression. Persecution of Kekkei Genkai users, internal terror, a cruel regime, all under the command of Yagura, the fourth Mizukage. Now remember a crucial detail. Yagura was the Jinchuriki of the Three Tails. That means he wasn't just any leader. He had raw Biju power. He theoretically had enough chakra to resist ordinary manipulation. And even so, he was controlled. Now imagine how that confrontation must have gone. Obito at that stage was no longer the war-broken kid. His kamui was refined. His intangibility was absurd. His strategic reading was cold and calculated. And most importantly, his Sharingan had reached a level capable of deep manipulation. Yagura probably wasn't weak. Quite the opposite. He had mastery over the Three Tails, devastating water techniques, enough power to flatten an entire battlefield if he wanted to. So this likely wasn't a quick fight. I imagine something far more tense. Maybe Obito studied Yagura beforehand. Maybe he waited for the perfect moment. Maybe he engineered the confrontation in an environment where he could maximize his intangibility. Yagura attacking with massive waves, choral techniques, Three Tails manifestations, trying to crush his opponent with overwhelming pressure, and Obito passing through it all, literally phasing through it. Because Kamui is unfair at that level. When Yagura tries to land a hit, Obito simply isn't there. And here's the key point. Obito didn't need to win with punches. He needed to win in the mind. And at some point, he lands the Genjutsu. Not just any Genjutsu. Total control. Turning the Mizukage into a puppet. That's insane. Because controlling a Jinchuriki isn't simple. It means the Genjutsu was powerful enough to suppress his consciousness and, indirectly, the influence of the Bijou itself. From that moment on, the fight ends. But the impact begins. Yagura becomes a puppet. And under that control, the Hidden Mist becomes what was known as the Bloody Mist Village. And the cruelest part? The world believed those were political decisions made by the Mizukage. But they weren't. It was Obito, manipulating everything from the shadows. If we think about it coldly, this might be one of the greatest strategic victories in all of Naruto. No declared war, no invasion, no army, just manipulation. And here comes that casual debate question. If Yagura had been 100% conscious, would he have had a real chance? Against Obito? Honestly, in raw power? Maybe. But against Kamui? Against intangibility? Against ocular genjutsu at that level? I think it would have been extremely difficult. Minato versus 1000 Stone Ninja. Now we're really talking about this legend the right way. The one people mention too quickly, but when you actually stop and picture it, it gives you chills. 1000 ninja. 1000. This isn't an elite squad, not a tracking team, not 2 Jonin and 3 Chunin. It's an entire military force mobilized in real war, organized, strategic, prepared to advance. Third Great Ninja War, Konoha under pressure. The hidden stone village pushing forward at full force. And in the middle of that open battlefield, dust rising, explosions in the distance, tension thick in the air, enters Minato Namikaze, not yet as Hokage, not as Naruto's father, but as the thing that made entire villages tremble, the yellow flash. Now think with me about how this must have actually gone down, because 1000 ninja don't just fall to one Rasengan and that's it. This isn't a tournament fight. This is war. Minato didn't have Kurama. He didn't have infinite chakra. He didn't have Sage Mode active. What he had was something worse for the enemy. Absurd speed, flying thunder god mastered at a surgical level, and a mind playing chess while everyone else was still playing checkers. Picture the battlefield. Before the confrontation even begins, Minato would have already scattered marked kunai strategically across the terrain. Each one wasn't just a weapon. It was a portal, a control point, an anchor. Now imagine the chaos. A stone ninja forms hand signs. Minato isn't there anymore. Another tries to flank. He appears behind him. A squad attempts a coordinated assault. He crosses the entire battlefield in a fraction of a second. And this is where it gets interesting. Because it's not about killing 1000 ninja with brute force. It's about breaking formation. It's about eliminating leadership. It's about turning an organized army into a desperate crowd trying to hit a ghost. 1000 people against one man would normally be a massacre. But 1000 people against someone you can't see, predict, or corner? That becomes panic. And panic in war is defeat. That's why this battle became legend. Not because Minato punched down 1000 men, but because he became the decisive factor. His presence shattered the stone's advance. He alone altered the course of that front in the war. And there's a detail many people forget. After that, other villages had direct orders. If you encounter Minato in battle, run. Hashirama versus Madara. This one isn't off-screen in the sense that we never saw anything, but the complete version, the true scale, what really happened in full detail, that remains in the imagination. And let's be honest, no fight in Naruto carries as much historical weight as this one. It's not just 2 strong ninja. It's the end of an era. It's the death of a friendship. It's the birth of Konoha. And at the same time, the proof that peace built on trauma always demands a price later. Now picture the scene, the Valley of the End. 2 massive statues that didn't even exist yet, because they would be erected afterward as a memorial to that clash. Hashirama Senju on one side, Madara Uchiha on the other. They weren't just clan leaders. They were the 2 most overwhelming forces that world had ever seen. And now we get into real fan discussion. Because when we try to imagine how that full fight went, it's not an exaggeration to say it looked like a battle of gods. Madara already had the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. He controlled Kurama. He had a complete Susanoo. He had village-level destructive power. Hashirama had wood release on a ridiculous level. He had absurd regeneration. He had chakra that seemed endless. And most importantly, he had conviction. Now think about the beginning of that fight. Madara arrives riding Kurama. That alone says a lot. He didn't want to talk. He wanted to prove that Hashirama's peace was an illusion. Hashirama wanted to save his friend. Madara wanted to destroy the dream. Imagine the first clash. Susanoo armor wrapping around Kurama. Wood erupting from the ground in colossal proportions. The Valley of the End literally being reshaped as they exchange blows. This isn't a quick fight. This is a private war. Hours, maybe days. Madara advancing with full pressure. Hashirama holding the line, absorbing, counterattacking. Now let's be honest here. Who would win? Because a lot of people simplify it by saying Hashirama always wins. But it's not that simple. Madara wasn't inferior. He was equal. What tips the scale is one thing. Endurance and purpose. Madara fought with accumulated hatred. Hashirama fought with sorrow. And sometimes that makes a difference. Hashirama didn't want to kill him. But let's be real here. If he truly wanted to, Madara wouldn't have stood a chance against the first Hokage. But he was willing. And that's what hurts about this fight. Because in the end, when Hashirama stabs Madara from behind, it's not victory. It's failure. Failure of friendship. Failure of the attempt to prove the world could change. And the craziest part? Madara lost, but he won at the same time. Because that's when he began planting the plan that would eventually lead to the infinite Tsukuyomi. He turned defeat into a seed. And that is very Madara. You've just watched the most important off-screen fights in Naruto. We saw how an underdog can save the day with discipline and sheer willpower. We also saw how legends are born on the battlefield during war against formidable opponents. But here's the question that won't go away. Which of these fights would you most want to see fully animated and shown in complete detail? Drop a comment below so I can know. And if you made it this far, it's because you enjoyed the video. So for me to keep producing more content like this, hit the like button and check out the video popping up on your screen where I talk about the best dojutsu in Naruto. It's nothing but insane power over there. Thanks for watching. My name is Zento, and this was Zento Explained. See you next time.